We're going to talk about the travel policy today, and the basic agenda is this. We're going to go through some important work you might consider doing about the strategy of your program and to really set the scene for going into the to designing a policy or reviewing a policy. We're going to talk about some policy design tips and considerations. I'm going to show you one or two things about how we at Goldspring go through the policy assessment process and give you some tips on that. And then finally, we'll finish up with a few slides on how you may consider managing your policy, and then some current trends we're seeing in travel policy. Okay, so all aboard, seatbelts on for the ride over the next hour. Okay, so travel policy scope. That's the first question that we have to ask ourselves is, what should we include in the travel policy? And we normally see 4 pillars or policies out there, 4 areas. It's a basic travel one, but then we see these other things either included, where the content is included in the travel policy, or it's a separate policy itself, right? And managed and run by a separate entity or function in the organization. So those other areas would be expense, meetings, and risk management. So maybe your travel risk management policy is a separate policy to your travel one. So the first question is, do we combine these, or do we have separate policies? And we'll talk a little bit about that. But before we do that, let's ask you, for the your travel policy, what other content scope is combined in your travel policy? And by that, I mean, you don't have a separate policy for these other items. It's all combined into one policy. So do you have a separate policy for expense, right? Or is expense combined into your travel policy, meetings, risk management, or travels on its own and all the others are separate policies if they exist? Just check if they're combined with the travel policy or not. Check any and all that apply. Okay, so this is very interesting results here. Slight variation in yesterday, a slightly different sample size, but I think yesterday we had 90% where the expense and the travel policy were one policy. We've got 83% today, so that's very usual. We would expect to see that. The other two were kind of equal yesterday, around about 14%. So in today's group, meetings is a little lower at 17%. Yesterday's group, which was a larger group, we got about 40%. And travel risk management, I was surprised to see the 67% of you was actually about 40% yesterday. So you kind of figure out where the numbers lie in that one. We generally see that one as more of a separate policy controlled by corporate security. But we do recommend that the expense and travel are combined as one policy. I think that's, I'd say it's a best practice, but that's common practice to do that. And the reasons are obvious, because there's so much content duplication otherwise. Okay, this may also help. It's also an additional factor into the different angle from the same question, but where does travel sit in your organization? So we're giving you the options of procurement or finance or HR. You've seen that. We've even seen travel sit under corporate security and legal among our client base, or is it somewhere else? So where does travel sit in your organization? Okay, no surprise there. Procurement very high at 60% of the respondents. We got, I think, 80% was procurement or finance yesterday. Little higher on the HR angle today, much higher than yesterday. So HR, yes. So I'm sure you've been asked that question multiple times as well. But here's why we're asking that question, right? So, what goes into the travel policy? What kind of top level overarching scope goes into the travel policy, and where does travel sit in the organization? So before we go any further in designing policies and getting into that nitty gritty, we're going to talk about what's driving your travel program, because the same thing should be driving the travel policy. And we came up with at Goldspring with 6 strategy drivers, and we've built a framework around those strategy drivers, right? So the way to look at these strategy drivers is, for this reason only, we've got 6 of them. The titles there are cost management, sustainability, regulatory compliance, traveler satisfaction, duty of care, and process efficiency. I'm going to go through those in a little more detail, but the basic question is any of these on its own a reason to manage travel in your organization. So we know that cost management was because that was one of the first reasons to do it. But sometimes sustainability can, and the requirements can be a reason, for managing travel rather than having unmanaged travel, right? Because it's responding to a need of a stakeholder or a goal of the company, right? So let's go through some of these in a little bit more detail, pull them apart and see how maybe they would affect the travel policy. So let's look at the first one of the 6 we put up there, and that is spend management. The first reason I think we ever had for managing travel. Our key internal stakeholders or partners, if you like, not the only ones, but would be procurement and finance. And the opportunity areas will be looking at developing supplier relationships to save money, and also controlling the demand, controlling the behavior of how we manage, of how we book travel. Right? And then we're going to have all kinds of measurements that come out that the procurement and finance are going to be interested in. Sure, most companies have some internal procurement savings methodologies. If it's more finance, they like to see P&L savings, like that we actually spent less on a particular item. From our travel side, we're often measuring value in soft dollars. There's loads of kind of measurements that we can spit out from our travel program. So how might that policy, how much will that affect our thinking in developing a travel policy or tweaking a travel policy? Well, it may, if this is important strategy driver, then we would want some strong wording around supporting preferred suppliers, or have a more rigorous approval process. It would also mean looking at class of service, right? Because we know how much business class, for example, travel first class, much more expensive than economy class. Hotel spend as well varies quite a lot. We're trying to drive advanced purchase behavior. We're measuring against lowest logical fare. Lots of discussion on that later, right? We've also got a long list of items that are either reimbursable or non-reimbursable in our policy. So our thinking on how cost conscious we are is going to affect those items as well. And maybe going through our, qualifying our booking channel. It used to be pretty much, you got to go through the TMC. Now we may be open to other options and ideas, right? So spend management, and that's how it would affect the policy. Next might be sustainability. Well, our key internal partners are going to be, probably you have a sustainability officer. Maybe it's the general C-suite who've made some public declarations and goals for the company on behalf of environmental objectives. Could be finance as well, because there's likely to be in the future some hard requirements on reporting carbon and environmental impact in financial and quarterly reporting, right? So those are our opportunity areas, right? It's reporting or reducing emissions, and maybe even developing carbon budgets. And having a mechanism to control that would be a reason for having a travel program, right? So we could measure where we are in our sustainability journey, if you like, through, I would recommend you might use the GBTA sustainability maturity model. And another measurement, more tactical, will be emissions reductions. So where might this affect the travel policy? Well, again, it may affect travel approval. Unfortunately, one of the most effective ways of reducing emissions is not to travel and to choose alternatives. So a very rigorous why is the need to travel may be something that's on the agenda, and so a travel approval process will be needed for that. We've seen companies build in carbon budgets, or making sure that we consider alternatives to travel or the mode of transportation, purchasing carbon offsets, replacing the term lowest logical fare with lowest logical carbon. I've seen that done. Promoting direct flights or favoring direct flights in the policy versus, remember, connect if you're saving X amount of money. Promoting economy class versus business class because it takes less space on the plane. Promoting the use of environmentally friendly hotels. Perhaps even specifying the hotel location to minimize ground transportation while you're on a trip, right? Promoting the use of electric or hybrid cars, promoting the use of public transportation, right? Those are the kind of things that we would expect to see incorporated into the policy with a little more focus if sustainability is a key driver for you, right? Okay, the next driver is regulatory compliance, right? So depends on the type of company and that you're in, and it's the regulations surrounding that company. And there's going to be a lot of different ones and some common ones across companies, right? So who are going to be your key partners? The finance group, internal audit, legal operations even can be key partners there. So what might come under the heading of regulatory compliance is quite a potpourri of things. It may be you want tax recovery, right? And you're able to do that, in which case you need a travel program to manage and capture that properly, right? Maybe your emissions reporting is going to become a regulatory thing. So again, you need a travel program to able to provide that data for your quarterly reporting. HCP, if you're in the healthcare vertical, right, the healthcare provider meeting compliance is very, very strong on their agenda as a reason for having a travel program. In other places, it's with flexible workforces today, it's knowing where your employees are, where they're traveling, so workforce mobility compliance, and then more generally, fraud detection is something that's generally on the minds of a lot of finance and legal folks in a company. So, and also from a work compliance point of view, the energy marine sector needs to make sure that its immigration, visa, passport compliance for the transient workers that they're often bringing in and out of countries and different areas of the world are all compliant, right? So again, regulatory compliance can be a reason for having a travel program, right? And you would simply measure that compliance. So what would we expect to see? We'd expect to see travel approval process, of course, perhaps more focus on documentation or the receipt level, detailed expense reporting approval, booking channel control, and maybe booking channels and special groups of booking channels for certain types of travel, entertainment, a lot of focus on the entertainment part and the justification for that, who's there, that kind of thing that's going to go into your expense reports. And of course, to protect against fraud, careful attention on that list of reimbursable expenses. So that would cover regulatory compliance. Then traveler satisfaction, I think that virtually speaks for itself, but the HR will be your key stakeholder, hopefully not your only stakeholder or partner in that. Key opportunities as to why they would see the travel program, that is the travel program important in overall employee motivation, right? So some measurements, you may have a regular survey of the travel policy. You may have a regular survey of the travel service, pre-trip, in transit and post-trip. You may survey the opinion of your travelers on the travel suppliers, and you may want to also document the amount of value components you're providing to your travelers through your supplier relationships. So where might we see this fall out into the policy? Maybe it's a more flexible passive approval process. And we can see that some of these strategy drivers now are in conflict with each other, right? So we need to find the balance and alignment. Class of service, again, it's going to cost more, but you're going to get happier travelers, right? Direct flights, of course. Maybe a central payment, using virtual cards, taking that, making that less hassle for the travelers. Combining leisure, business and leisure travel, allowing that, being very, very flexible there. Simplifying or eliminating expense reports. Goldspring found through some of its work that highest on the list of travelers was the post-trip efficiency in getting those expense reports processed and paid. So even eliminating the expense report, we're talking about a lot about that in the industry today, right? Maybe providing on the list of reimbursable items, maybe it's providing your travelers, making expedited security, your TSA, global entry, TSA pre-check, a reimbursable item. So anything that we can do on the policy to enhance traveler satisfaction will come from this strategy driver. And then duty of care, right? So we know most about this. I'm going through this very quickly, but what would we like to see in the policy? Better control on the booking channel or bringing in data from outside booking channels, better pre-trip qualification that will be outlined in the policy, looking at the immigration and visa requirements, making sure that those are reimbursable. Immunization is reimbursable. It's not always in all companies, right? making personal protective equipment reimbursable, providing cash advances or insurance so that travelers find an easy way out if they're in difficulty. So those are the things that you might see in the policy to satisfy to meet your duty of care strategy driver, if that's important to you. And then finally, overall process efficiency. And we added this in, and we're seeing that that this is big on a lot of companies' agendas. The overall process efficiency for traveler, strategy driver, a reason just for managing travel to make it very, very efficient and compelling for the travelers, as you hear in the industry, a delightful experience it should be. And your key partners may be finance and IT in this world. Your opportunity areas are improving that overall end-to-end travel process, approval, booking, in transit, post-trip, and also considering traveler productivity while in transit. Your measurements might be something like cost per transaction for each part of the process or time per transaction. Right? So where might this fall out in the policy? Having a really efficient travel approval process, right? It doesn't mean to say that you can't be rigorous, but it needs to be efficient and easy for the traveler. Providing them with some channel flexibility, maybe, if they do prefer that. Having payment reimbursement, again, integrated into the policy and easy for the traveler. While they're on the trip, maybe providing lounge access, high-speed Wi-Fi, expedited security, anything that makes the traveler more efficient and productive. You could say even probably class of service there as well. Boarding, seat selection, those kind of things. Anything that can increase the productivity of the traveler. Right? So those are our 6 strategy drivers. Okay. So I'm just going to throw out a question here for you at the moment. We'll have a little pause while I regain my breath and ask you the 3rd poll question, which is, do you have a governance committee with your internal stakeholders or partners? Yes or no? Okay. So a very similar result to yesterday. 17% of people use a governance committee to manage your policy and travels, right? Versus 83% that don't. Yesterday it was about 20%, 80%, or I think it was 21% yesterday, right? So this speaks to where we house travel as well. And if it maybe becomes, here's a thought, maybe it becomes less important where you actually house travel, where it reports into, right? If you have a governance committee that's really managing the travel program involving these other stakeholders, right? So how much we go about identifying those stakeholders who we might form a committee with, right? So here's how you would go about determining your strategy drivers and therefore identifying your stakeholders. You need to ask the following set of questions, the 6 questions, and one of them is, each one of them is for each strategy driver. And the questions are, we've put a lot of thought into how well or how the question is crafted, right? And then they all start virtually the same way. So the question is for the stakeholder, right? It's very important that the question is for the stakeholder there, right? I said that HR may be, looking at employee satisfaction, but they shouldn't be the only ones. So all the stakeholders need to ask this question, right? So how important is a well-managed travel and expense program in your company's ability to manage spend and deliver cost savings? Of course, that's ticking off or checking off the cost management strategy driver, right? But the question is, how important is it to finance and procurement? If your travel spend is really, really low to other spend buckets, then travel may not be a focus for them, and therefore, may not be a focus. They may not be a key strategy driver, right? And each of the questions, is for these strategy drivers and goes about the same kind of thing. So it's how important is a well-managed travel and expense program in your company's ability to meet its duty of care responsibilities? And I pause there because here's the kind of thing that we know we've all heard in the industry, that duty of care is very important. Therefore, we have to know where our travelers are. Yet at the same time, most programs have got about 50% hotel leakage, right? How do those 2 thoughts stay, how do those 2 thoughts stay in the same head, if you like? How are those compatible? They're really not. Right, we're saying that it's important to know where everybody is. We draw that conclusion from the fact that duty of care is important. But the person who should be saying whether travel is important to duty of care is, of course, the security officer. If they're wondering about why we have low compliance and leakage on hotels, right, they're the ones who should be demanding that we drive compliance, and likely then you're going to see compliance being driven. Right? If they're not asking that questions, right, then maybe they haven't been asked that question or aware of the issue. But maybe they've got other ways of locating travelers and they don't need the travel program. So this is all about how important is the travel program to your stakeholders in these different areas. And that's how these questions are phrased. I'll give you one more example. Big European company that is very, very, very keen on environment and sustainability. Got some very, very big business goals on that. It's a very large program, right? Very large travel program too. But the travel program and the emissions from corporate travel, business travel, is only 1% of the scope 3.6 emissions that company is dealing with. Right. So travel is not a focus for that company because they've got so many other areas to make investments where they can deliver emissions reductions. Right. So the travel manager is aware that travel is not a focus for sustainability. Okay, let's take that one off the table and focus on other strategy drivers. Right. Good to know that. So you would put some kind of survey out there, and we'll come to how Goldspring can help you in a little while. But put that survey out there and ask those stakeholders how important the travel program is to meeting these business objectives, right? On a range of 1 to 4. Is it business critical or is it not necessary? Right. Okay. So we would ask that question. And from the results, by balancing those, I think the best way to express it is in the form of a pie chart here. Right. So if we've got a balanced program, we may end up with equal segments of the pie chart for each strategy driver. Right. Or we may have a more cost-focused kind of program where savings was very, very important, but we really weren't concerned about the overall transaction costs, or maybe less so about traveler satisfaction, medium importance, right? Duty of care or regulatory was, maybe that was a 1, 2, right, as well, a 1 as well, I should say. So more of a cost-focused program there. When we look at this one, we can see it scored very, very high on duty of care, very, very high on traveler satisfaction. So we'll call this maybe a more employee-focused travel program, right, based on the results of the strategy drivers, right? And then we would know, again, how to shape our program and how to shape the travel policy. Right? Compliance, again, we're looking at traveler satisfaction, we're looking at duty of care, that's regulatory compliance, right, is scores high as well as efficiency, because we need efficiency processes to monitor this, right? But we're slightly less important on the savings and the sustainability piece, right? So there's going to be lots of different types of profiles out there as well. It'll be exciting one day to look at these and how these shape by industry and what are the more common types. But it's very, very important to understand, what kind of style and shape your program is in order to design your travel policy. But there's one piece missing here, and that is we could end up with this equal segment, for example, and we've got one here where everybody answered 3. Right. So travel is important to that program, right? But we could end up with the where everybody scored it 1. So it looks the same as the 3 in terms of the shape of the pie chart, but travel is overall less important. So we need to add up those scores to get the total. And we can see we've got a very important program here. It's called overall high importance across the board. This one was focused in certain areas, so it was less important to other stakeholders. So overall, slightly less important, but very important to some stakeholders, right? And then we've got these 2 comparisons here where travel is important, and our dial shows that the travel program is very, very important across the business. On one, style was the same, if you like, the shape was the same, but travel was not as important to the overall program, right? Those things we must understand before building our travel program and policy. So let's go back to you, poll number 4. What are the top levers that drive your travel program? Can you pick the top 3? If you were to put yourselves in the shoes of the stakeholders, right? If you asked all those stakeholders, what do you think you would come back as the top 3 drivers of your program? See if we come up with the same answers as yesterday, right? So just pick 3. right? And try and interpret how you feel your key stakeholders would feel about this. Okay, so savings 100%, very similar to yesterday. It scored on 90, 91, something high 90s yesterday, right? And I thought that because we had the HR representation today, which we didn't have so much of yesterday. Yesterday, duty of care came in second place with process efficiency in third place, ahead of traveller satisfaction. But we've got a different group today, which means that different policies should be or policies should be shaped differently for different programs, right? We've got a slightly different mix today. So coming in equal in second and third places today was traveller satisfaction and process efficiency. Process efficiency was in both surveys, right? It was equal to today and third place yesterday, right? With just satisfaction coming in today for duty of care, right? So very, very interesting that the process efficiency. And by the way, we're seeing that that kind of rings the bell that we were looking at last year, that we were sounding last year about really making sure your travelers have efficient processes. Again, your key stakeholders there may be IT as well. They tend to have larger budgets than the travel program, so to leverage those guys. So the results of this assessment will inform you where is the best place for travel and expense to sit in the organization, which stakeholders you should be represented on the governance committee, which internal partners may even help you by providing funding for the travel program. If you're really satisfying their requirements and their key drivers, right, shouldn't they provide a little bit of funding for your travel program? And most importantly, today's topic, it should help you decide what your travel policy should look like, and which external suppliers and partners are best suited to support your program, because different suppliers and partners are going to be able to achieve different things. No, they're not all built the same. And I'm talking about whether it's the TMC or the online booking tool or the payment or the expense process, right? Different ones are going to respond differently to different drivers. If you feel you want to take the survey, then you're welcome to go to the Goldspring Consulting website. You can take the survey and share that with your key stakeholders, and we'd be happy to let you do that. Okay, so let's talk now about designing and building the policy. So first thing is the governance section. Every policy that we write needs some kind of governance section. And on the right, you'll see the things that you would expect to see in the governance section, right? You expect to see a nice cover page with the title, effective date, who it's prepared by, who approved it, right? The policy administrator, who's the key contact, table of contents, references, a revision history, and maybe even a letter or a message of executive support. Right? Those are the kind of things you would expect to see maybe on the front page or as an intro to the document. It depends in what format it exists. But also in the government section, the first few paragraphs of the document normally are outlining a few key things about the policy. What is the purpose of the policy? Well, we've just spent 30 minutes covering the purpose of the policy, right? Because it's the same as the purpose of the program. Right. So you outline your strategy drivers. Probably in most cases, all 6 should go in there, right? Being compliant, providing a good experience for the travelers, right? Cost control, et cetera, the 6 drivers. The governance section should outline who the policy applies to, who owns the policy, who administers the policy, how often the policy is reviewed, and who reviews the policy and who approves the policy, right? So all those things, it should be in the governance section. Okay. And then we're going to get into policy content. Right? And this will be shaped, of course, by which blocks we started with the travel member expense, meetings, and travel risk management. Some of those may be in separate policies, but for the moment, since most of you said, a lot of you said that you have all of this content in your travel policy, let's continue and look at the kind of 12 area or 10 areas that we see are the modules or the sections of a travel policy, right? And you probably want different sections to cover these different areas. Another thing, when you're thinking about now getting into the writing of the policy, common mistake we make is understanding what is policy level content and what is either too high for policy level or too low for policy level. Most of the time we see the policies sometimes drifting downwards into procedures, and we want to try and keep all that content out of a policy. right? There's lots more content that should not be in the policy, which we'll discuss later. But remember, this is not a procedure document. It's a policy document, right? Guidelines, what you should do, what you're not expected to do, that kind of thing. Right. I've also seen recently that some visions and strategies and company culture is included in the policy. That should really be in a high-level document because it probably applies to all policies in the company. Right. But I did see it repeated in travel policies. So make sure the content is the right level in our document hierarchy pyramid. Okay. That we're not going too far down or too far up. Other key considerations is if you're in a very large company and you've done lots of mergers and acquisitions, do you consolidate policies or do you let separate business units run separate policies? So it's really, are you managing a global program? Is your company integrated? Do the employees mix together across divisions, travel across divisions? Do you have common functions like HR? Do you have common compensation and benefits, common IT, common procurement? Do the folks work together? Do their career paths span multiple divisions? Answering those questions will help you determine whether you want one policy to cover them all, or whether you need separate policies. And equally, very similar questions for geography as well. We've certainly worked with companies where their regions really operate individually, and other times where it's much more a centralized global command and control program, right? So questions you ask yourself: do you have a global travel manager or program? Do you have significant spend in multiple countries? Do you have a lot of international travel or collaborate with international offices, right? Understand that a global travel policy does not mean one size fits all, right? There should be the difference to resolve in your policy, if you want to go global, is to resolve the regional differences, or just bringing content that applies to one region. Even if it doesn't apply globally, right? That's fine. You can still bring it in and satisfy one particular region, right? Document, if necessary, if you can't resolve the differences, then document regional variations, right? And try and aim for a minimum standard in policy strength, allowing policies to be more restrictive locally, right? Is your key to solving that. So again, global or regional. Okay. The next section, one of the modules here, we talked about a general section or a booking section, if you like. That should outline travel approvals, guidelines for activities pre-trip, in transit and post-trip. It should also define the requirements for how you approve exceptions to policies or out-of-policy bookings. Once an out-of-policy booking is approved, right, it's now in policy. Okay, so how you account for that, what process you have for that should be defined in the policy, and also put in some kind of message about the situations not covered by the policy, right? And the fact, just ask, okay? And the policy should also define the consequences of non-compliance. All right. We are going to give you this copy of this presentation. I know Melissa's going to email out you a copy. So here's a list of tips that we would have for designing an effective policy, kind of a potpourri of good advice that we've come across in our policy assessments and evaluations over the years. So the policy should support the strategic objectives as determined by the strategy driver assessment, right? We spent 30 minutes on that. So obviously, we want to make sure that the policy fits the travel program and the company's goals. Consider each policy point for ease of compliance auditing and the impact it may have, right? So don't spend a lot of time on corner cases and things that really don't impact a lot of behavior or cost or not just cost, but anything that impacts those strategy drivers, right? You can't necessarily, it shouldn't be a hard and fast rule, but just consider it how the policy is worded and what content you want to put in there, right? You'd like to be able to measure compliance against each policy point. It's not always possible. The policy should clarify where necessary the approvals and the actions that should be taken pre-trip, in-transit, and post-trip, right? We covered that on the previous slide. Great policy, of course, should be concise, right? We maintain that a best-in-class policy can address all the necessary points across all those 4 pillars and all those 10 modules we talked about in less than 5,000 words, and that will ensure a reasonable reading time. It should be precise, not just concise, but precise, and leave little, in fact, no room for interpretation or ambiguity. For that reason, try and avoid duplication. One thing that we see a lot in policies is that we'll keep talking about approvals and exceptions and how to do all that throughout the policy. Really, we wanted just one statement at the start of the policy. We often see the consequences of non-compliance sprinkled throughout the policy. For example, on the payment, well, if you don't, use the card or don't do this, we'll take your card away. That should be one statement at the beginning of the policy, right? Don't sprinkle that throughout the policy. Remember, many policy areas can be easily presented in lists and appendices, and we'll get to that on the next slide, right? How to really make your policy more streamlined. Again, do not try and cover every possible situation, right, that could occur. Superfluous content, right, over wordiness, I call it, should be avoided and housed on the corporate internet site. What we typically see in policies is, prefacing each section in the policy, an explanation or a justification as to why we're even addressing this in the policy. Well, to our opinion, we've defined our policy reason, our objectives of the policy at the start of the document. That's all done, right? So we don't need to, make a whole bunch of commentary about every single part of the policy as we go along, right? Put that kind of content on your intranet site. Okay. Avoid, as we said, detailed operational processes and procedures. Avoid putting in suppliers or names or contact information. Move that to a website link, or the policy is going to become outdated very quickly. Use consistent terminology. If you call it a travel management company, call it a travel management company throughout the document, right? Or an online booking tool, or however you want to call it, but be consistent in your terminology. And reference other policies if necessary, but do not duplicate any content. Follow those set of guidelines, right? And go and read your policy, after this webinar, and see how many of those guidelines you're, abiding by or not. Okay, I said a lot of the content can be moved into a list form, and I saw one policy that was almost completely list form. So much of the policy content can be presented in this format as reimbursable and non-reimbursable items. Right. So we would simply indicate whether the items are reimbursable or not, or whether it's subject to some kind of cap or threshold or conditions. You may want to indicate if an additional approval is required, although I said try and minimize that. So in our we've got a list here. The list this is a small part of the list. This is a very small part of the list. The list is probably about 120 items long. But just looking at the way that we've seen some of the things worded here, we'll let you know how useful this can be. Also, what we've provided on this list is kind of our benchmark, our standards, if you like, that we see in the industry. And as an offer, if you do have your stakeholders fill out our strategic driver survey, we will provide you with a complete list with all these benchmarks, right? So, for example, typically on the list of reimbursable, non-reimbursable items, airline club membership or airline in-flight entertainment, right? They're almost exclusively not reimbursable. Airline in-flight meals, yes, right? Normally there's a commentary about it's part of the per diem or something like that. Airline seat assignment is something we're seeing more optional. Sometimes yes, sometimes no, right? That's more of a decision point. So this can be a great guideline for you, right? Airline expedited security, TSA pre-check, clear global entry, those kind of things. I think they should all be reimbursable, but not all policies do, right? That's not an optional one. Or you can put that a cap or a threshold in there. This one will be a threshold. Hotel laundry, minimum stay, and you put 5 days in here, right? So a benchmark is about 5 days for that, right? And then replace all the wording in the policy by saying something like rental car intermediate, right? With minimum travelers, right? Or zero minimum travelers, right? Yes. Rental car full size with 2 travelers or more, or greater than more than 2 travelers, yes, or no, right? Rental car upgrade, no, right? So those kind of things you can use. So this is basically putting in list format a lot of words that would be in the policy, saying that you need more than take a paragraph for most policies to write that out, that you need 3 people or more in the car to rent a full-size car. Again, it can all be done in list format, right? Even your meals are there as well, right? 75 for full day or 60 for a travel day, right? So very, very effective way of covering most of your travel policy content. Okay. I talked about the policy length and conciseness. How many words are there in your travel policy? So another poll there. Is it less than 2,000? It is possible. It is possible you can do it. Is it between 2 and 5,000? Between 5 and 10,000? We're getting a little bit wordy here. Or is it over 10,000 words? And I have seen those too. What do you think yours is? So most between 2 and 5,000, pretty acceptable, right? We can still do better, I'm sure, but some are up there. 40% between 5 and 10,000 words. Okay, we could do something here. I've got a question in from Tammy. What are examples of procedures that tend to fail in the travel policy? I would say maybe can I rephrase that of content in the travel policy that fails? And I was thinking about that just for a few seconds now. I have to say, without question, the number one fail or area where policy doesn't meet reality was you must book your hotel through the travel policy, right? Because then we look at the data and we find that that's just not true. Right? I would say more of a wording type failure would be defining the itineraries that the travelers must select. I would say it's also failure points are the way that business class is described, right, or eligibility is described. I would say that there's opportunities that most policies don't address is the modes of ground transportation, when you should use rental car, when you should have personal mileage, when you should use taxi, those kind of things as well could be better defined. And I would say also class of service for the hotel. We spend a lot of time on class of service for airline, but we really don't cover that on hotel, right, on those. So where do we see traveller health and wellness being included in the policies? Very, very good question there. I would say that that is probably where you get compensatory time off, huge issue, but a lot of the more government organizations and institutions do allow that. So I'd say that's the number one thing that travelers want, like compensatory time off. If you're making me travel outside office hours on the weekend, then compensatory time off, I would say one. I would say additional class of service on red-eye flights. Okay, the overall class of service eligibility and the value components and the flexibility that you're providing as well. So I would say those are the key policy elements that I would look at. I would also, slightly on this topic, get into the area of mobility and accessibility. How easy are we making travelers travel for travelers who have accessibility issues or mobility issues, right? I think that comes into the same sphere. Do you recommend adding language around business and leisure travel in the policy? Yes, I think we covered that right at the start. Absolutely, and more so, not only allowing it and being flexible with it, but if you're traveling with family members and companions, that they should be included in your travel risk management. Can't get away from that. There's no point in having the traveler covered by your duty of care procedures. We need to evacuate you out or warn you this, right? If they're traveling with their family, they're not going to leave their families, right? They're not going to leave their families in a danger zone if we need to provide some kind of evacuation, right? So you've got to be very, very careful that you're aligned in. If you're allowing leisure, right, and they're traveling and they're now traveling with family members or friends, then kind of need to be aware of that. It's going to start to become your responsibility. Okay, thanks for the questions. Add some more in. I'll try and get to some later, although I think I'm running a bit behind time over this. Other questions here. Just remember the word domestic. We're here in the US. The word domestic does not mean USA, right? At least not always. Okay, so it's where travel is in the same country as the destination, right? So it can be confusing, but let's get away from using that if we're going towards a global policy. Be clear, very clear about the areas of the policy that are mandated, right? I'll just say here, avoid weasel words. I'd like to do a word count when I'm evaluating a policy. Should, encourage, try, is that really going to drive compliance, right? Also, other things that can be completely misinterpreted, right? Justifiable. Reasonable. Everybody's got different understandings of the word reasonable. I think it's very reasonable that I should travel first class everywhere I go. I think that's very reasonable. Apparently, my boss in my previous company didn't. Appropriate. So those are things that you should avoid. Right, should be very, very clear and precise. Right. So also think about this. Don't put in mandates where you're not going to get strong compliance. Right. Think about that. So if you want to say you must use the company, that's the following phrase here, you must use the company online booking tool for domestic bookings, and you've only got 80% success rate. What are you going to do with the other 20%? Really, what are you going to do? Right. So really, you're kind of hiding behind the policy here if you say must, right? Really, what you want to do is you say you may use the company online booking tool for domestic bookings, right? And then you just got to work on making that online booking tool the right selection, configuring it right, your approval process, making that the compelling choice for your travelers, right? To do that versus calling up the agency. Now you can rejoice in your 80% success rate, 0% non-compliance, and you've got a credible policy. So be very careful where you use the mandate language in your policy. Okay, air class of service. Another thing here to credibility, if the C-suite has different rules for everybody else on the board, write it down. Otherwise, your regular traveler is going to see them and perceive it as non-compliance, and that's going to lead to bad behavior as well. I would also say on class of service, avoid, and I'll go back to Tammy's first question of this, avoid defining class of service by geography. Right? International, regional, domestic. Yeah, we know what those terms are, right? But an intercontinental flight could be from one side of Turkey to the other. Okay, right? The longest domestic flight in Canada may be something like 10 hours. I don't know, maybe it's a little bit shorter than that, right? Singapore to Malaysia would be to Kuala Lumpur would be an international flight, which is 500 miles, right? So use like time-based or distance-based parameters for your class of service, right? Here's some useful phrases you might like to use in your travel policy, right? Local management may make policy more restrictive, right? Always a good phrase to add in there. Including but not limited to, okay? We didn't think of everything, can't think of everything all the time, right? It's a good phrase, good coverall phrase. This policy cannot cover every situation. Ask your manager or whoever if you have questions or are unsure, right? That should be in the part of the policy as well. Very, very useful. We'd like to see that in there. Okay, very, very quickly. When was the last time your policy was updated? Okay. Nobody within the last year, but 80% within the last 2 years, and that ties in, at least the 80% within the last 2 years ties with yesterday, right? Yesterday's session. So 20% within the last 5 years. Maybe you need a little refresher look at it. Okay. So we don't normally get very salesy on webinars and Gold Spring masterclasses, but we are going to show you, I think it's useful just to show you kind of the process that we go through when we're evaluating a policy, what you might want to do. So we have about 77 different elements, right? These are not the reimbursable, non-reimbursable items. That's a completely separate list, but we have about 77 elements that we go through for each of those sections, right? And so, for example, here's a very key one, the use of non-preferred airlines or suppliers, right? So we would have a requirement written out there, kind of what we're looking for in that particular, to see in the policy pertaining to that requirement, right? Then we're going to put it in the client text, right, which is probably actually we've even summarized it there, but we'll put in a summary here and then we'll compare it with policies that we have across the table. And then we're going to give it a scoring mechanism, and either it really addressed, the text really addressed the requirement, which in this case it didn't, right? Or it missed it completely, and there was something in there about it. So we gave that like half a point out of 1, right? Out of 1. So he said preferred carriers should be used where available. We're looking to say that to make this really, really clear and unambiguous, right? So we're looking to see a savings threshold in there. So can you use non-preferred carriers if they're cheaper? It's typically what you see. Or are you even going to support your preferred carriers further and say, we want to see maybe a 50% savings threshold before you can use non-preferred carriers, right? That's kind of how we would score our policies, quite qualitative, right? Similar thing for who administers the policy, wasn't specified here. We've got some benchmarks in our other policies, and we've scored 0 points on that one. And we have those 10 sections we have a kind of benchmark scoring system, right? We add all those points up, express them as a percentage, and we can tell where each policy kind of stands. Each section gives us an idea of where to focus. And, we even provide a kind of a matrix, comparison matrix there. So That's kind of what we do when we're evaluating policies as well. But I want to finish up in the few minutes that remain talking about managing the policy and then some more recent trends. So managing the policy, do think that you should establish that policy governance committee or forum, having identified your key stakeholders and make sure they're represented. Try and have regular reviews of them, right? 12 months, I don't even think that 12 months is really enough, right? If you want to get good communication and good dialogue with those stakeholders. And what should these reviews look like, right? It's incumbent upon you as the travel buyer, I think, to prepare the content and the agenda for the review. So we should be looking at compliance to policy. Those should be key things that we should be reporting out on, right? Monitor through our measurement and savings against each of those strategy drivers, right? Monitor the effectiveness of the program and the policy. Right? If you've made changes to the policy, then let's look at the before and after, right? Did the changes to the policy have the impact that we wanted to see, right? Also bring to the table some suggestions and some what if scenarios. If we did this, here's a cost savings idea, right? Or here's an idea how we could redo our class of service policy or our connection policy, right? And the impact across all the strategic drivers of that. And then, of course, where you've got it, everybody loves to see benchmark information. So those should be the key elements of your stakeholder review. Communication of the policy, very, very important. Most of the time it's done at the onboarding process. I will say at the onboarding process, we're onboarding new employees and they've probably got another 100 documents to sign. Got to get their bank details in there. They've got to choose a healthcare program. Oh, and I've got to read the travel policy. So that's probably not a good idea for them to really retain it, right? So how also consider at the same time how updates and changes to the policy are communicated, right? So because that needs to be done on an ongoing basis. So maybe the best way to do this is to figure out to find out if you've got a learning management system available in your company and to integrate the policy into that in form of annually onboarding or annually you've got to go through this test, right? Another suggestion I'll throw out for you is that maybe if you have your expense people and you've worked with those, again, through your stakeholder committee, they can identify the non-compliant travelers and not just the non-compliant travelers, but also the approvers for whom this non-compliant behavior is slipping through, right? So maybe you have those people review that and maybe non-compliant travelers, get to go through that online policy review and quiz again, right? That should raise awareness and drive a little bit more compliance. Of course, we're going to talk about the policy of the future. I think it needs to be more in line with our processes. I'll get to that in a second. Okay, finally, well, just before the end, I'm going to speak to a few policy trends that we've seen out in the marketplace recently over the last few years, certainly since COVID. Some trends are a continuation. Compliance measurement and awareness. I think in the current economic environment, we're getting a lot of requests across our client base to monitor compliance, the cost of non-compliance and where savings opportunities might be with regard to policy changes, right? Again, feeding into our stakeholder committee. So we're seeing a lot of that. Of course, we always used to have must book through the TMC, must book through the TMC, but we're beginning to see the multi-channel bookings, right? With guardrails, right? Under certain conditions being allowed in some policies. That's going to be somewhat of the future, right? So we have to make sure that our programs account for that, but also keep that under control. We've seen a lot of articles recently, or because of NDC questioning the value of lowest logical fare. Right. We've also seen a refocus on lowest logical fare because of NDC as well and the fragmentation, right? So we'll have to see how that shakes out. Over quite a period now, maybe 10 years, we've seen gamification, incentivizing voluntary downgrades, that kind of thing, or gamification involving policy compliance, and we've seen those kind of things. Perhaps more allowing, used to be kind of broadband, must do everything to the travel agency in the same as the booking, using the supplier apps now as a valid reason for making method for making in-transit changes. They're probably a lot more efficient and probably got a lot more up-to-date information. for the travelers. Mixing of personal and business, right? And as I said earlier to that answer, inclusion of the spouse and family that are traveling with you in your risk management processes, right? Class of service analysis and benchmarking, a lot of that in our what if scenarios. We've seen built-in guardrails around the shared economy lodging, Airbnb, that kind of thing. Is it allowed? Is it not allowed? Under what conditions? We've seen added to the list of reimbursement. Some of the, I'll say I didn't put it on this list, but maybe the seat selection as NDC becomes more available, meal, the meals or reimbursement of meals in flight, but then of course expedited security and reimbursement for personal protective equipment was being added to policies. Right. More flexibility in the policies and encouragement for sustainable options, right? Gave you that list as well. And again, from the cost containment, we've seen a lot of programs, huge number of programs last year, really take a focus on hotel market caps and looking at the meal per diems as well and tweaking those. So that's something that we've seen a lot in policies. And I'll say this, a future travel policy, we really don't want one written document. Maybe you're not going to answer that question on the number of words in your policy in the future, because we probably want to see our policies in line with where and when we need them, right? So the policy is just pinging you as you're booking, as you're making a change, as you're nearing a location. So maybe your app is time-based, itinerary-based, location-based, and it's just letting you know what you can do, which is in and out of policy at a particular juncture of your trip. And that's really what you're seeing there. So that's really all we had to present today, and I think I got through a few questions. I will stay on for a minute or two if there's anybody wants to put anything in the Q&A, or anybody has a question. I'll put it in there right now. And if not, I'll still stay on for a few minutes, but if not, then thank you very, very much for participating in our travel policy webinar, and wish you all the wonderful rest of the week. Okay, I'm staying on there. So is there anything in the Q&A that's coming on? Oh, there's one more. Happy to stay on as long as you need, right? So Q&A. I would love to encourage more sustainable practices, but I feel like I'm shouting into the void. Do you have any advice? Yeah, this really goes back to the first part of the presentation, right? You can't, it's very, very difficult to tell your stakeholders that they should be concerned about something. If your chief sustainable officer, if travel's not an important box for them, then it's very, very difficult, right? But at least you should know that, right? I know we want to do that for the program, but it's really the company and those senior stakeholders that need to set that agenda and view the travel program as something that can deliver and help them out, right? So certainly a conversation with the chief sustainability officer. Prepare yourself by going in and looking at the public stated goals, the requirements that you may have to follow, right? When I went through, that one chart, and I hope, Shana, that you get remember that one page, and maybe I can go back to it without, give me a few seconds here. There we go. I can just switch that back on now. So go to the people who may be interested, right? Show them how you can help them, the opportunity areas, right? Show you how you can measure how you're going to help them, and show them what policy elements are going to be relevant to this and that you could tweak, right? And, that's your best way of getting them interested in it. But if they're not interested, then, you're really kind of got an uphill task here. Okay. Are there any more Q&A questions? I think there was one more that came in. There's a chat. Thank you, Shana. Okay, one more Q&A do we have? Did I have one more? I was trying to find it. No, I don't think there are any more open questions at the moment. Okay. Well, thank you everybody who stayed on the extra couple of minutes. We're always free at Gold Spring if you have questions for us. So, fire away. We're always happy to help you out. So again, thank you for attending the webinar, and look forward to seeing you all again in the future. Thank you.